The year 1815 marked the zenith of English aristocratic society, where the Georgian mansions of Mayfair stood like monuments to power and privilege. In this world of rigid hierarchy and unspoken rules, the royal palace of Westminster prepared for what would become known as the most anticipated social event of the season. The grandest ballroom in all of England gleamed under thousands of crystal chandeliers, each prism casting rainbow reflections across marble floors polished to mirror perfection. Lady Catherine Ashworth stood at the towering windows of Ashworth Manor, her emerald silk gown rustling softly as she gazed across the manicured gardens toward the distant spires of London. At 22, she possessed the refined beauty that came from generations of aristocratic breeding, porcelain skin unmarked by common labor, golden hair arranged in the elaborate coiffures fashionable among the haute ton, and eyes the color of sapphires that seemed to hold secrets of their own. "The invitations have been distributed throughout the realm," announced her lady's maid, Margaret, as she carefully arranged Catherine's jewelry collection across the mahogany dressing table. Each piece told a story of the Ashworth family's prominence: the diamond tiara worn by Catherine's grandmother at her presentation to King George III, the pearl necklace gifted by the Duke of Wellington himself, and the emerald bracelet that had belonged to the family for over 2 centuries. The social architecture of 1815 England operated on principles as immutable as the laws of physics. At its apex sat the royal family, followed by the ancient ducal lines whose titles stretched back to William the Conqueror. Below them, in carefully ordered precedence, came the marquises, earls, viscounts, and barons, each rank separated by invisible but absolute barriers that determined everything from seating arrangements at dinner parties to the order of procession at state ceremonies. Catherine's father, the Earl of Ashworth, commanded respect not merely through his title but through his influence at court. His grandfather had stood beside Nelson at Trafalgar, his father had counseled King George during the American colonial troubles, and he himself served as advisor to the crown on matters of continental politics. The Ashworth name carried weight in every drawing room from Edinburgh to Dover. "His Royal Highness himself shall attend," Catherine murmured, reading the ornate letter that bore the royal seal. The prospect of dancing in the presence of royalty sent excitement coursing through the veins of every eligible young lady in England. This ball represented more than mere entertainment; it was a matrimonial marketplace where fortunes were made, alliances forged, and the future of noble bloodlines decided with the grace of a minuet. The preparations had consumed months of meticulous planning. French chefs labored in the palace kitchens, creating culinary masterpieces that would satisfy the refined palates of Europe's most sophisticated diners. Italian musicians rehearsed elaborate compositions in the ballroom's superior acoustics. Florists from the finest houses in London arranged exotic blooms shipped from the far reaches of the empire, orchids from India, roses from Damascus, jasmine from Ceylon. Lady Catherine's younger sister, Miss Isabel Ashworth, burst into the chamber with the energy that marked her 18 years. Her auburn curls danced about her shoulders as she carried news from the morning's correspondence. "Catherine, you simply must hear what Lady Pemberton has written. The Duke of Ravenswood has returned from his continental tour, and speculation runs rampant about his intentions at the ball." The Duke of Ravenswood occupied a position of particular fascination within society's highest circles. At 31, he remained unmarried despite possessing every qualification that rendered a gentleman desirable: vast estates spanning 3 counties, a fortune accumulated through shrewd investments in shipping and commerce, and a lineage that traced directly to the Norman conquest. His dark hair and penetrating grey eyes had inspired countless romantic fantasies among the débutantes of the ton. "Ravenswood's presence shall certainly elevate the evening's significance," Catherine replied, though she maintained the composure expected of a lady of her station. Behind her carefully controlled expression, however, lay memories of stolen glances and meaningful conversations from the previous season, moments that had planted seeds of possibility in her romantic imagination. The morning's activities proceeded according to the elaborate ritual that governed aristocratic households. Breakfast was served in the smaller dining room, where delicate porcelain bore the Ashworth coat of arms and silver gleamed under the gentle morning light. The Earl reviewed correspondence from his steward regarding the management of his estates, while the Countess planned the final details of Catherine's presentation gown for the royal ball. The seamstresses from Madame Du Bois have outdone themselves, the Countess announced, examining the exquisite creation that hung in Catherine's dressing room. The gown represented months of skilled craftsmanship, ivory silk embroidered with silver threads, seed pearls sewn in intricate patterns across the bodice, and a train that would require careful maneuvering through the ballroom's crowded spaces. As the day progressed, messages arrived from across London's fashionable districts. Lady Worthington inquired about transportation arrangements to the palace. The Viscountess of Blackmore sought advice on appropriate jewelry selections. Mrs. Dalton expressed concerns about her daughter's first presentation at such an elevated gathering. Each communication reinforced the extraordinary nature of the approaching celebration. The very air seemed charged with anticipation as Catherine walked through the portrait gallery of Ashworth Manor. Generations of her ancestors gazed down from their gilded frames, men who had served crown and country, women who had graced the courts of kings and queens. Their painted eyes seemed to whisper encouragement for the evening that would surely mark a pivotal moment in the continuing saga of the Ashworth legacy. Yet beneath the surface excitement, subtle currents of unease began to stir. Catherine noticed hushed conversations between her parents that ceased abruptly when she entered rooms. Her father spent unusually long hours in his study, and twice she observed urgent messengers arriving under cover of darkness. The household staff moved with nervous energy that suggested knowledge of matters beyond their mistress's awareness. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the manor's elegant facade, Catherine could not dispel the growing sensation that forces beyond her comprehension were gathering momentum. The royal ball promised to be magnificent beyond imagination, yet something in the very foundation of her carefully ordered world seemed to shift like sand beneath her feet. The Duke of Ravenswood stood in the oak-paneled library of his Belgrave Square mansion, reviewing documents that bore the private seal of His Majesty's government. The leather-bound volumes surrounding him contained the accumulated wisdom of centuries, yet the papers spread across his mahogany desk dealt with matters far more immediate and dangerous than philosophical discourse. As a trusted advisor to the Crown, Alexander Fitzwilliam held secrets that could topple governments and reshape the map of Europe. Your Grace, his private secretary, Mr. Whitmore, entered with the discretion that marked 20 years of service to the Ravenswood family. The coded message from Lord Castlereagh has arrived from Vienna. The Congress of Vienna continued its deliberations over the post-Napoleonic order, and intelligence from those negotiations carried implications that extended far beyond diplomatic protocol. Alexander's grey eyes scanned the encrypted correspondence with practiced efficiency. Years of service to the Crown during the Continental Wars had honed his ability to discern truth from deception, to read between the lines of official communications, and to understand the deadly serious game of international politics. What he discovered in Castlereagh's message sent a chill through his aristocratic composure. French agents have been identified operating within London society, he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of grave concern. Intelligence suggests they seek to compromise members of the royal family through social infiltration. The implication struck him with the force of a physical blow. The royal ball represented not merely a celebration but a target of extraordinary strategic value. Meanwhile, at Ashworth Manor, Catherine descended the grand staircase for the morning's social calls, her morning dress of pale blue muslin reflecting the refined taste that marked ladies of the highest breeding. The ritual of visiting occupied the mornings of every fashionable woman in London, providing opportunities to exchange information, negotiate social alliances, and maintain the complex web of relationships that sustained aristocratic society. Her first destination was Pemberton House, where Lady Pemberton maintained one of London's most influential salons. The drawing room buzzed with conversation about the approaching ball, but Catherine detected an undercurrent of nervous speculation that seemed unusual even for the gossip-loving ton. "Have you heard the most extraordinary rumors about the French delegation?" whispered Miss Thornton, a young lady whose father served in the Foreign Office. "They say Bonaparte's supporters have not entirely abandoned their cause, despite his exile to Elba." The mention of the deposed emperor sent visible tremors through the assembled ladies, reminding them that the peace they enjoyed remained fragile. Lady Pemberton, a formidable woman in her 50s whose connections extended to the highest levels of government, leaned forward with the conspiratorial air that marked the delivery of particularly significant intelligence. I have it on excellent authority that certain members of the diplomatic corps remain under suspicion. The security measures for the royal ball have been increased most dramatically. Catherine felt a growing unease as she absorbed these revelations. The world of ballrooms and morning calls suddenly seemed overshadowed by darker forces that operated beyond the reach of embroidered fans and crystal chandeliers. Her thoughts turned inevitably to the Duke of Ravenswood, whose own connections to government circles were well known throughout society. The afternoon brought an unexpected encounter that would alter the trajectory of Catherine's carefully planned existence. While walking in Hyde Park with her maid in attendance, she observed a figure approaching along the serpentine path that wound between ancient oak trees. The Duke of Ravenswood advanced with the confident stride that marked men accustomed to command, his dark blue coat fitted perfectly across broad shoulders, his leather boots polished to mirror brightness. "Lady Catherine," he said, removing his hat with the fluid grace that aristocratic breeding produced. "What a fortuitous encounter. I had hoped for an opportunity to speak with you before this evening's festivities." His grey eyes held an intensity that seemed to communicate volumes beyond the simple courtesy of his words. "Your Grace," Catherine replied, offering a curtsy that demonstrated the years of deportment training that began in earliest childhood. "I trust your continental travels proved both educational and rewarding." She maintained the formal tone expected in public discourse, though her pulse quickened at his proximity. "Indeed, though I confess that foreign courts pale in comparison to the elegance of English society," Alexander replied, falling into step beside her as they continued along the park's manicured pathways. "I find myself grateful to return to more civilized surroundings." The slight emphasis on his final words suggested layers of meaning that extended beyond mere social pleasantries. As they walked, Alexander's conversation turned to seemingly innocent topics: the beauty of the autumn foliage, the architectural merits of the new buildings rising in Regent Street, the quality of the season's theatrical presentations. Yet Catherine sensed an underlying urgency in his manner, as though he sought to communicate something of vital importance while maintaining the facade of casual conversation. "I understand that your family maintains close connections to the royal household," Alexander said, his tone carefully neutral. "Such proximity to the crown brings both privilege and responsibility." The observation carried weight that extended far beyond its surface meaning, and Catherine found herself studying his profile for clues to his deeper purpose. "The Ashworth family has served the crown faithfully for generations," Catherine replied, pride evident in her voice. "We consider such service both honor and duty." She wondered why the Duke's question seemed to probe the extent of her family's royal connections with such subtle persistence. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of another rider, Lord Hartwell, a gentleman whose reputation for gambling and dissolute behavior marked him as precisely the sort of company that respectable young ladies were taught to avoid. Yet Catherine noticed that Alexander's manner underwent a subtle but distinct change, his posture tensing almost imperceptibly as Hartwell drew near. "Ravenswood, old fellow." Hartwell called out with the forced joviality that often masked deeper calculations. "Splendid to see you return from your travels. I trust you'll honor us with your presence at this evening's celebration." The question seemed innocuous enough, yet Catherine detected an undercurrent of challenge in the man's tone. "Indeed, Hartwell. Wild horses could not prevent my attendance at such a magnificent occasion," Alexander replied smoothly, though Catherine noticed his hand unconsciously move toward the walking stick that might conceal more than decorative purposes. "I anticipate the evening shall prove most illuminating." After Hartwell departed with elaborate bows and insincere pleasantries, Alexander's demeanor grew more serious. "Lady Catherine, I hope you will permit me to offer a word of caution regarding this evening's festivities. The political climate remains more unsettled than many in society realize, and certain individuals may not harbor the pure intentions that their social standing might suggest." Catherine felt a thrill of alarm mixed with excitement. "Your Grace, surely you do not suggest that danger might threaten at a royal celebration?" The possibility seemed simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, transforming her anticipation of the evening from simple social excitement to something approaching adventure. "I suggest only that a lady of your intelligence and breeding should remain alert to nuances that others might miss," Alexander replied carefully. Your position within society grants you access to conversations and observations that could prove significant. I hope you will not hesitate to seek assistance should circumstances require it. As they parted company at the park's entrance, Catherine found her mind racing with implications and possibilities. The Duke's warnings had transformed her perception of the approaching ball from innocent entertainment to something approaching a battlefield where the weapons were whispered words and meaningful glances rather than swords and pistols. Returning to Ashworth Manor, Catherine discovered unusual activity that reinforced her growing sense of unease. Additional servants moved through the halls with the efficient purposefulness that suggested preparation for more than routine social obligations. Her father closeted himself in his study with visitors whose carriages bore no identifying crests, and her mother's correspondence seemed to require an unusual degree of secrecy. As evening approached and the time for final preparations arrived, Catherine could not shake the sensation that the royal ball would mark more than a simple celebration. Forces beyond her comprehension were converging on the palace, and she found herself positioned at the center of events that might reshape not only her own destiny but the fate of the realm itself. The shadows lengthening across her chamber seemed to whisper of secrets yet to be revealed, and Catherine prepared for an evening that promised to transform her understanding of the world in which she moved with such carefully cultivated grace. The royal palace blazed with illumination as the finest carriages in England discharged their elegant passengers beneath the massive stone archway that had welcomed monarchs for centuries. Crystal chandeliers cast their radiance across marble floors where the footsteps of kings and queens had worn paths through history. Tonight, however, the ancient walls would witness events that would echo through the corridors of power for generations to come. Lady Catherine emerged from the Ashworth family carriage in a vision of ivory silk and silver embroidery, her grandmother's diamond tiara catching the torchlight as footmen in royal livery assisted her descent. The Earl of Ashworth, resplendent in his court dress of midnight blue velvet with gold braid, offered his arm with the dignity that befitted his station. Behind them, the Countess followed in emerald satin that complemented the family emeralds adorning her throat. "The gathering appears even more magnificent than anticipated," Catherine murmured as they joined the procession of nobility ascending the grand staircase. Dukes and duchesses, earls and countesses, viscounts and barons created a river of silk and jewels flowing toward the ballroom where His Royal Highness would soon make his entrance. The ballroom itself defied description, a cathedral of elegance where soaring ceilings supported by marble columns created acoustics that transformed the slightest whisper into music. Mirrors lined the walls, multiplying the splendor infinitely, while arrangements of exotic flowers perfumed the air with fragrances gathered from across the empire. An orchestra of 30 musicians, positioned in an alcove decorated with gold leaf, provided melodies that seemed to capture the very essence of refined civilization. Duke Alexander of Ravenswood stood near the great fireplace, his evening dress of black silk emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the aristocratic bearing that marked men born to command. Yet Catherine noticed that his gray eyes moved constantly across the crowd, cataloging faces and monitoring conversations with the alertness of a military officer rather than a social celebrant. "Lady Catherine," he said, approaching her with a bow that displayed perfect courtly manners. "You grace this magnificent assembly with your presence. Might I request the honor of the first waltz?" His formal words carried undertones that suggested the dance would provide opportunity for more than mere social pleasantries. As the evening's presentations began, Catherine found herself studying the assembled company with new awareness of the complexities that Alexander's warnings had revealed. Lord Hartwell moved through the crowd with calculated charm, but she noticed that his conversation seemed to focus on guests whose connections to government circles were particularly strong. The French cultural attaché, Monsieur Dubois, displayed impeccable manners while engaging various ladies in seemingly innocent discourse about art and literature. The moment arrived for His Royal Highness to make his entrance, and the entire assembly fell silent as trumpets announced the arrival of Majesty itself. The prince appeared in cloth of gold, his chest adorned with the ancient orders of chivalry that connected the present monarchy to centuries of royal tradition. Behind him followed members of the royal household whose presence elevated the evening from magnificent to historically significant. "Ladies and gentlemen," the prince began, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed ballroom, "we gather tonight to celebrate not merely the beauty of our society but the strength of our realm. In these times of international uncertainty, the unity displayed in this room represents the foundation upon which our nation's greatness rests. Catherine felt a surge of patriotic pride mixed with growing apprehension as she observed the reactions of various guests to the royal address. While most faces reflected appropriate reverence and loyalty, she noticed subtle expressions that suggested not all present shared the prince's sentiments about English supremacy. The dancing commenced with a minuet that allowed couples to move through elaborate patterns while maintaining the formal distance that propriety required. Catherine found herself partnered with the Duke of Ravenswood, their movements synchronized through years of training in the social graces that marked aristocratic breeding. "The evening progresses beautifully," Alexander murmured as they moved through the prescribed steps. "Yet I confess to maintaining certain reservations about the complete innocence of all present." His eyes indicated several guests whose behavior he found suspicious, though his expression remained pleasantly social for the benefit of observing eyes. "Your Grace suggests that enemies of the crown move among us?" Catherine whispered, the thrill of danger mixing with her natural curiosity. "Surely such individuals would not dare attempt mischief at a royal gathering?" "History teaches us that the boldest strokes often succeed precisely because they appear impossible," Alexander replied, his hand guiding her through a particularly complex turn. "Napoleon himself built an empire through strategies that his enemies dismissed as too audacious to attempt." As the minuet concluded and the orchestra prepared for the next selection, Catherine noticed unusual activity among the palace guards positioned discreetly around the ballroom's perimeter. Their alert postures suggested heightened vigilance that extended beyond routine security measures. The evening's second dance brought Catherine into partnership with Lord Hartwell, whose conversation immediately turned to topics that seemed designed to extract information about her family's activities and connections. "The Earl of Ashworth commands such respect at court," Hartwell observed as they moved through the steps of a country dance. "I imagine his counsel proves invaluable during these complex times. Does he share his insights into continental affairs with his family?" Catherine maintained her composure while recognizing the probing nature of his questions. "My father discusses only matters appropriate for family conversation," she replied carefully. "His discretion in official business remains absolute." She wondered why Hartwell seemed so interested in the extent of her knowledge regarding government affairs. Of course," Hartwell said with a smile that failed to reach his eyes. "Though I imagine a lady of your intelligence absorbs a great deal through mere observation. The perspective of someone positioned so close to power could prove most enlightening." As the dance progressed, Catherine became increasingly aware that their conversation was being monitored by other couples whose movements seemed designed to maintain proximity to her and Hartwell. The French attaché danced nearby with Miss Thornton, while several other guests maintained positions that suggested coordinated surveillance rather than random social interaction. The realization struck her with stunning clarity: she was being recruited, though for what purpose remained unclear. Hartwell's questions, the positioning of other guests, even her selection as his partner might represent elements of a larger plan that extended far beyond innocent social interaction. When the dance concluded, Catherine excused herself to seek refreshment, using the movement toward the refreshment tables to observe the assembly from a different perspective. What she discovered intensified her growing alarm. Several guests moved through the crowd in patterns that seemed designed to facilitate private conversations away from the main gathering. Messages were passed with the subtlety of professional operatives, and certain individuals displayed the heightened alertness that marked those engaged in clandestine activities. "Lady Catherine," a familiar voice said behind her, and she turned to find Alexander approaching with two crystal glasses filled with champagne that sparkled like liquid starlight. "I trust you are enjoying the evening's entertainment." "Indeed, Your Grace, though I confess to observations that raise certain concerns," Catherine replied, accepting the champagne while using their conversation to scan the crowd for signs of the suspicious behavior she had detected. "Your intelligence serves you well," Alexander said quietly. "The situation has developed complexities that extend beyond my initial warnings. I fear that forces hostile to the crown have indeed infiltrated this gathering, and their intentions may be more serious than mere intelligence gathering." Before Catherine could respond, a commotion near the ballroom's main entrance drew their attention. Palace guards moved with sudden urgency toward a group of late-arriving guests whose credentials seemed to be undergoing unusual scrutiny. The music continued, but perceptive observers could detect an underlying tension that transformed the atmosphere from celebration to something approaching crisis. "Your Grace," a palace official approached Alexander with the discretion that marked urgent business conducted in public spaces. "His Royal Highness requests your immediate attendance in the private chambers. A matter of utmost importance has arisen." Alexander's face revealed nothing of his thoughts, but Catherine noticed the subtle tension that tightened his jaw. "Lady Catherine, I fear duty calls me away from your delightful company. Perhaps we might continue our conversation when circumstances permit?" As Alexander departed with the official, Catherine found herself standing alone in the magnificent ballroom while currents of danger swirled around her like invisible rivers. The royal ball that had promised to be the social triumph of the season was transforming into something that might determine the fate of nations, and she stood at the center of events that could reshape the world as she knew it. The orchestra continued playing, couples continued dancing, and conversations continued flowing, but Catherine could no longer ignore the growing certainty that tonight would mark more than the end of a social season. It might mark the end of everything she had believed about the safety and security of her aristocratic world. The private chambers of the royal palace whispered with centuries of state secrets as Duke Alexander entered the oak-paneled room where His Royal Highness waited with Lord Castlereagh and the Duke of Wellington. Maps of Europe covered the mahogany table, marked with symbols that indicated troop movements and intelligence reports from across the continent. The gravity of their expressions revealed that the evening's festivities had been overshadowed by developments of the utmost significance. "Ravenswood," the prince said without preamble, "intelligence has reached us that Napoleon has escaped from Elba. French agents operating within London society have been coordinating preparations for his return to power. Tonight's gathering provided them with an unprecedented opportunity to compromise members of the royal family and gather intelligence that could facilitate an invasion of England itself." Alexander felt the blood drain from his face as the implications struck him with devastating force. "Your Royal Highness, are we certain of this intelligence? The security implications for tonight's ball are catastrophic if Bonaparte's agents move freely among our guests." Wellington, the Iron Duke whose victory at Waterloo had not yet occurred in this timeline, leaned forward with the stern expression that had intimidated enemies across Europe. "Our sources in France are unimpeachable. Napoleon landed on the French coast 3 days ago and marches toward Paris with growing support from the army. His agents here in London have been tasked with creating chaos within our government structure to prevent effective response to his return. The guest list for tonight's ball was carefully cultivated by these agents," Lord Castlereagh added, his diplomatic mind already calculating the ramifications. "Certain invitations were arranged to ensure the presence of individuals whose loyalty to the crown remains questionable. We suspect that a coordinated attempt to assassinate or kidnap members of the royal family was planned for this very evening." Meanwhile, in the ballroom below, Lady Catherine moved through the continuing festivities with heightened awareness of every gesture and conversation surrounding her. The absence of the Duke of Ravenswood left her feeling exposed and vulnerable, yet she could not abandon her position without drawing unwanted attention to her growing suspicions. Lord Hartwell approached her again, his manner more urgent than before. "Lady Catherine, I wonder if you might spare a moment for private conversation. There are matters of mutual interest that require discretion." His request carried an undertone of command that suggested refusal might not be advisable. "Of course, Lord Hartwell," Catherine replied with careful composure, allowing him to guide her toward an alcove partially screened by elaborate floral arrangements. Her heart raced as she recognized that whatever game was being played around her was approaching its climax. "Your father's position provides him with access to information that could prove valuable to certain interested parties," Hartwell began without further pretense. "Intelligence regarding British military preparations, diplomatic communications, strategic planning. Such information commands considerable compensation from those who appreciate its worth." Catherine felt shock and revulsion wash over her as the full scope of Hartwell's proposal became clear. "Lord Hartwell, surely you cannot be suggesting that I betray my country and my king? Such actions would constitute treason of the highest order." I suggest merely that changing circumstances require flexible loyalties, Hartwell replied, his cultured voice taking on a harder edge. Napoleon's return to France has shifted the balance of power in Europe. Those who align themselves with the rising sun profit handsomely, while those who cling to fading stars face inevitable destruction. Before Catherine could respond, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridors beyond the ballroom. Palace guards moved with sudden urgency, and whispered communications passed rapidly among the security personnel stationed throughout the gathering. Something had clearly gone wrong with whatever plans the evening had originally encompassed. It appears that circumstances have developed beyond our original calculations, Hartwell said, his eyes tracking the movement of guards with professional interest. No matter. Contingency arrangements have been made for precisely such developments. Catherine realized with growing horror that she had become a hostage in a game whose stakes extended far beyond her personal safety. The royal ball that should have celebrated the triumph of English society was collapsing into chaos as foreign agents revealed their true purposes and loyalties divided along lines that could tear the nation apart. In the private chambers above, urgent consultations continued as intelligence reports arrived with devastating frequency. Agents have been identified among tonight's guests, reported Colonel Morrison, the head of palace security. Several individuals whose credentials appeared impeccable have been revealed as Bonaparte's operatives. We suspect that the assassination attempt may already be in motion. We must evacuate His Royal Highness immediately, Alexander said, his military training taking precedence over social considerations. The ballroom has become a battlefield where the enemies wear evening dress instead of uniforms. Impossible, the prince replied with the stubborn courage that marked the Hanover bloodline. Retreat in the face of French intimidation would send precisely the wrong message to both our allies and enemies. We shall face this threat with the dignity befitting the crown of England. Wellington nodded approvingly. His Royal Highness speaks wisely. However, we must move decisively to neutralize the threat while maintaining the appearance of normal festivities. Panic among the guests would serve our enemy's purposes admirably. As plans for containment and counteraction developed in the private chambers, the ballroom below continued its elaborate dance of danger and deception. Catherine found herself trapped in conversation with Lord Hartwell while her mind raced through possibilities for escape and communication with loyalist forces. Your cooperation ensures your family's continued prosperity, Hartwell continued, his tone becoming more threatening. Resistance serves no purpose beyond ensuring unpleasant consequences for those you hold dear. The Ashworth name could disappear from the rolls of nobility as easily as it was inscribed there centuries ago. The threat against her family crystallized Catherine's resolve. Whatever dangers she might face personally, she could not permit foreign agents to destroy the heritage that generations of Ashworth ancestors had built through loyal service to the crown. Her mind began calculating possibilities for action that might alert loyalist forces to the danger surrounding them. The opportunity arrived when a commotion near the orchestra drew Hartwell's attention momentarily away from his surveillance of her movements. Catherine seized the moment to move toward the main body of the crowd, hoping to locate palace guards or other guests whose loyalty to the crown remained unquestionable. Her progress was blocked by the French cultural attaché, Monsieur Dubois, whose cultured smile masked intentions that had become terrifyingly clear. Lady Catherine, how delightful to encounter you again. I trust you are enjoying the evening's entertainments. Such gatherings remind us that civilization's greatest achievements transcend national boundaries. Indeed, Monsieur Dubois, Catherine replied, recognizing that she faced another operative whose purpose extended far beyond cultural diplomacy. Though I confess that recent events have rather diminished my enthusiasm for international cooperation. Ah, but my dear Lady Catherine, international cooperation represents the future of European civilization. The old orders must give way to new arrangements that reflect changed realities. Those who embrace such changes prosper, while those who resist face inevitable displacement. The conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Duke Alexander, who moved through the crowd with barely contained urgency. His eyes met Catherine's across the space that separated them, and she read in his expression the confirmation of her worst fears about the evening's true nature. "Your Grace," she said as he approached, relief flooding through her voice. "How fortuitous to encounter you again. I fear I have developed quite the headache and wonder if you might escort me to seek some fresh air." Alexander immediately understood her coded request for extraction from the dangerous situation. "Of course, Lady Catherine. The evening air might provide precisely the remedy you require." His arm offered both protection and guidance as he moved her away from Hartwell and Dubois, whose expressions revealed their displeasure at losing their quarry. As they moved toward the ballroom's French doors that opened onto the palace gardens, Catherine whispered urgently, "Your Grace, Lord Hartwell has revealed himself as an agent of Bonaparte. He demanded that I provide intelligence regarding my father's government activities. I fear that the entire gathering has been compromised by enemy operatives." "Your intelligence confirms our worst suspicions," Alexander replied grimly. "Napoleon has indeed escaped from Elba, and tonight's ball was designed to facilitate the assassination of His Royal Highness. We must remove you from danger immediately while coordinating the response to this threat." The royal ball that had begun as a celebration of English society's pinnacle was collapsing into a deadly confrontation between loyalty and treason, between the established order and revolutionary chaos. Catherine found herself at the center of events that would determine not only her own fate but the future of the realm itself. The palace gardens provided temporary refuge from the deadly masquerade continuing within the ballroom, but Duke Alexander knew that safety remained an illusion as long as Bonaparte's agents moved freely through the corridors of power. Ancient yew trees cast shadows that could conceal both protectors and assassins, while the distant music from the ballroom created an eerie soundtrack to their desperate consultation. "Lady Catherine, the situation has deteriorated beyond our most pessimistic projections," Alexander said, his voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Intelligence suggests that the assassination attempt will coincide with the midnight supper, when His Royal Highness traditionally addresses the assembled guests. We have perhaps 30 minutes to prevent a catastrophe that could plunge England into civil war." Catherine felt the magnitude of responsibility settling upon her shoulders like a mantle of lead. "Your Grace, surely my father must be informed immediately. His connections throughout the government could mobilize loyalist forces to counter this threat. Your father departed the ball an hour ago, summoned by urgent messages that we now suspect were forged by enemy agents," Alexander replied grimly. "The Earl of Ashworth has likely been removed from London entirely, along with other key government officials whose presence might have complicated the conspirators' plans." The realization that her family had been deliberately isolated from the unfolding crisis struck Catherine with devastating force. The careful planning that had gone into tonight's operation extended far beyond simple infiltration. Bonaparte's agents had orchestrated a comprehensive strategy designed to decapitate the British government's leadership while eliminating the royal family's ability to rally resistance. "Then we stand alone against forces that have spent months preparing for this moment," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her heart. "What actions remain available to loyal subjects of the crown?" Alexander studied her face in the moonlight, recognizing the courage that marked truly noble blood. "A message must reach Colonel Morrison, the head of palace security, informing him of the specific nature and timing of the threat. The guards remain loyal, but they cannot protect against dangers they do not anticipate." "I shall carry such a message," Catherine declared without hesitation. "My presence in the ballroom will draw less suspicion than yours, given that Hartwell and his associates have already identified you as a potential obstacle to their plans." "The danger to yourself would be extraordinary," Alexander protested. "These individuals will not hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens their mission. Your beauty and breeding provide no protection against the ruthlessness of professional assassins. The danger to England herself outweighs any personal considerations," Catherine replied with the resolve that had sustained her family through centuries of service to the crown. "If loyal subjects refuse to act when action is required, then we deserve the fate that befalls us." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of footsteps along the garden path. Lord Hartwell emerged from the shadows with two companions whose presence suggested that Catherine's absence from the ballroom had not gone unnoticed by the conspirators. "Lady Catherine, Duke Ravenswood," Hartwell said with a smile that failed to mask the menace in his voice. How pleasant to discover you enjoying the evening air. Though I confess surprise that such delicate constitutions require withdrawal from the festivities at precisely the moment when they reach their climax. Alexander positioned himself protectively in front of Catherine while his hand moved to the sword concealed beneath his evening coat. Lord Hartwell, your concern for Lady Catherine's well-being is touching, though unnecessary. We were merely discussing the beauty of the palace gardens under moonlight. Indeed, Hartwell replied, advancing with his companions in a movement that suggested professional coordination. Though I fear that further discussion must wait. Pressing matters require Lady Catherine's immediate attention, and your presence, Duke Ravenswood, has become something of an inconvenience. The confrontation that Catherine had dreaded was upon them. In the moonlit garden where kings had once walked in peace, representatives of two incompatible loyalties faced each other with the deadly seriousness that marked the collision of empires. Gentlemen, Catherine said, stepping forward with the dignity that marked ladies trained from birth to command respect, surely whatever business you have with me can be conducted with the courtesy appropriate to civilized society. Courtesy becomes a luxury when time grows short, Hartwell replied. Napoleon marches toward Paris with growing support from the French army. Tonight's operation must succeed if we are to prevent British interference with his restoration to power. Your cooperation ensures a swift conclusion to these unpleasant necessities. Alexander drew his sword with the fluid motion that marked a gentleman trained in the deadly arts of honor. Lady Catherine's cooperation was never yours to command, Hartwell. Stand aside, and allow us to return to the ballroom. I think not, Hartwell said, producing a pistol with the casual efficiency that revealed his true nature. The age of amateur soldiers playing at war has ended, Ravenswood. Professionals have taken charge of events, and resistance serves only to complicate matters unnecessarily. The standoff in the garden crystallized the larger conflict tearing apart European civilization. Ancient codes of honor confronted revolutionary pragmatism, aristocratic duty faced democratic radicalism, and personal courage stood against organized conspiracy. The outcome would determine not merely their individual fates but the future direction of the continent itself. Catherine, Alexander said quietly, when I give the word, run toward the palace doors. Colonel Morrison maintains guards at the main entrance who will recognize you and provide protection. I shall not abandon you to face these villains alone, Catherine replied with fierce determination. Whatever fate awaits us, we shall meet it together as representatives of everything noble in English civilization. Before Hartwell could respond to their defiance, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed from multiple directions around the garden. Palace guards appeared from concealment with the swift efficiency that marked professional soldiers responding to crisis. Colonel Morrison himself emerged from behind an ornamental fountain, his uniform bearing the insignia of campaigns across Europe. Lord Hartwell, Morrison said with the calm authority that had maintained order through decades of service to the Crown, you and your associates are under arrest for treason against His Majesty's government. Surrender your weapons and submit to custody, or face the consequences of continued resistance. The trap had been sprung, but not in the manner that any of the participants had anticipated. As Catherine watched events unfold with breathless fascination, she realized that the evening's elaborate deceptions had concealed yet another layer of strategy that extended beyond even the conspirators' careful planning. You appear surprised, Hartwell, Alexander said with grim satisfaction. Did you imagine that British intelligence remained ignorant of Bonaparte's escape and its implications? Tonight's gathering served multiple purposes, not least of which was identifying and neutralizing the agents who had infiltrated London society. The royal ball had been transformed into an elaborate trap designed to expose and capture the very enemies who believed themselves to be manipulating events for their own purposes. Catherine found herself simultaneously relieved and awed by the complexity of the strategies that had swirled around her throughout the evening. Yet even as the immediate danger receded, she understood that the larger conflict was only beginning. Napoleon's return to France would reshape the balance of power across Europe, and the peace that England had briefly enjoyed was about to give way to renewed warfare on a scale that would dwarf previous conflicts. The moonlit garden that had witnessed tonight's confrontation would remember this moment as the beginning of the final campaign that would determine whether freedom or tyranny would shape the future of civilization itself. Dawn was breaking over London as the last of Bonaparte's agents were taken into custody by His Majesty's forces. The elaborate trap that had masqueraded as a royal ball had succeeded beyond the most optimistic projections, netting not only the immediate conspirators but also revealing the extent of the spy network that had penetrated English society. Lady Catherine stood at the windows of the palace's morning room, watching the sun rise over a city that had narrowly escaped catastrophe. Duke Alexander entered the chamber with news that would reshape their understanding of the night's events. "The interrogations have revealed the full scope of Napoleon's plans," he said, his voice carrying exhaustion from the long night's work. The assassination of His Royal Highness was merely the first phase of a comprehensive strategy designed to plunge England into chaos while Bonaparte consolidated his return to power in France. "Thank Providence that such schemes have been thwarted," Catherine replied, though her thoughts extended beyond immediate relief to contemplation of the larger implications. "Yet I confess to wondering what role Providence played compared to human planning." Tonight's events unfolded with a precision that suggests extensive preparation. Alexander smiled with the satisfaction of a successful intelligence operation. "British agents have been tracking Bonaparte's network for months, Lady Catherine. Your father's sudden departure from the ball was not the result of enemy deception but rather a coordinated effort to position loyalist forces throughout London while the conspirators revealed themselves at the palace." The revelation that her family had been involved in the counterintelligence operation from its inception struck Catherine with a mixture of pride and indignation. "Am I to understand that I served as an unwitting participant in this elaborate performance? That my fears and concerns were merely elements in a larger dramatic production?" "Your reactions were entirely genuine, which made them invaluable," Alexander explained, approaching her with the tender concern that had been impossible during the dangerous charade of the previous evening. "Had you been informed of the true nature of events, your responses would have lacked the authenticity necessary to convince our enemies that their deceptions were succeeding." Catherine turned from the window to face him directly, her sapphire eyes reflecting the complex emotions that the night's revelations had stirred within her heart. "Your Grace, I find myself struggling to distinguish between reality and performance, between genuine feeling and strategic necessity. Were your attentions to me merely elements of the operational requirements?" Alexander closed the distance between them with steps that carried him across more than physical space. He was crossing the boundaries that had separated duty from desire, strategic necessity from personal longing. "Lady Catherine, my feelings for you transcend any operational considerations. Indeed, my concern for your safety nearly compromised the mission on several occasions when my protective instincts threatened to override strategic requirements." The confession hung between them in the morning light like a bridge spanning the chasm that had separated their hearts throughout the dangerous masquerade. Catherine felt her pulse quicken as she recognized in his gray eyes the same emotions that had stirred her own heart despite the evening's terrors. "Your Grace," she began, then paused as she realized that formal address no longer suited the intimacy of their shared experience. "Alexander, the events of this night have revealed truths that extend beyond matters of state. I find that my affections have been engaged more deeply than propriety might suggest appropriate." "Catherine," Alexander said, her name carrying all the tenderness that circumstances had previously forbidden him to express. "The danger we faced together stripped away the artificial barriers that society constructs between hearts that were meant to unite. I have come to understand that my feelings for you represent the deepest truth of my existence." The morning room that had witnessed countless diplomatic consultations now became the setting for a more personal negotiation as two hearts that had been tested by fire sought to establish terms for their future happiness. The sunrise streaming through tall windows seemed to bless their union with golden light that transformed the chamber into a temple of love. The social conventions that might once have required extended courtship seem rather insignificant after surviving assassination plots and international conspiracy, Catherine observed with a smile that reflected both joy and the wisdom that comes from facing mortality. "I find myself caring very little for the opinions of society matrons regarding the propriety of our attachment." Alexander laughed with genuine happiness for the first time since returning from his continental mission. "Then you would consent to become the Duchess of Ravenswood, despite the irregular circumstances of our courtship? Despite the fact that our engagement will be announced in the same newspapers that report the foiling of Bonaparte's conspiracy?" "I can imagine no greater honor than joining my life to yours," Catherine replied, allowing him to take her hands in his with the tenderness that their previous encounters had made impossible. "Though I confess curiosity about what our married life might entail, given your apparent career in matters of international intrigue." Napoleon's escape from Elba signals the beginning of what may prove the final campaign against Bonaparte's ambitions, Alexander said seriously. "The Duke of Wellington will need experienced officers for the conflict that is surely coming. I fear that our honeymoon may be interrupted by the call of duty to crown and country. Then we shall face whatever challenges arise together," Catherine declared with the courage that had sustained her through the night's trials. "The love that has grown between us under such extraordinary circumstances can surely survive the tests that ordinary marriage might bring." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of His Royal Highness himself, who entered the morning room with the bearing that marked one who had faced mortal danger and emerged victorious. Behind him came the Earl of Ashworth, whose presence confirmed Alexander's revelation about the coordinated nature of the Loyalist response. "Lady Catherine, Duke Ravenswood," the prince said with genuine warmth, "we find ourselves profoundly in your debt. Your courage and quick thinking prevented a catastrophe that could have changed the course of European history. It is our pleasure to announce that you shall both be honored by the crown for your service to the realm." "Your Royal Highness," Catherine said, offering a curtsy that carried new dignity earned through trial by fire, "we seek no reward beyond the knowledge that England remains free from the threat of tyranny." "Nevertheless, service to the crown deserves recognition," the prince replied. "Duke Ravenswood, we hereby appoint you as our special envoy to the coalition forces preparing to meet Napoleon's renewed aggression. Lady Catherine, we shall be pleased to announce your engagement to the Duke with our personal blessing." The Earl of Ashworth stepped forward with paternal pride that reflected both satisfaction with his daughter's choice and approval of her conduct during the crisis. "Catherine, your behavior throughout this ordeal has brought honor to the Ashworth name. Your mother and I could not be more pleased with your engagement to Duke Ravenswood, whose character has been proven under the most demanding circumstances." As the morning progressed and the full scope of the night's success became clear, Catherine and Alexander found themselves at the center of celebrations that marked not only their personal happiness but the triumph of loyalty over treachery, love over conspiracy, and honor over expedience. The royal ball that had been cancelled due to a family secret, the secret intelligence operation designed to trap Bonaparte's agents, had achieved purposes far beyond its original social intentions. It had revealed the depth of foreign penetration into English society, eliminated a network of spies that threatened national security, and brought together two hearts whose love would provide a foundation for the challenges that lay ahead. "My dearest Catherine," Alexander said as they stood together on the palace terrace watching London awaken to news of the night's victory, "we begin our life together knowing that love tested by danger becomes stronger than any force that might seek to divide us." "My beloved Alexander," Catherine replied, her hand resting confidently in his, "we shall face whatever trials the future brings with the certainty that hearts united in noble purpose can overcome any obstacle that fate may place before us." The sun climbed higher over a city that had survived the night, its golden light illuminating the beginning of a love story that would endure through all the challenges that the coming war with Napoleon would bring. In the distance, church bells began to ring the hour, their music celebrating not only the dawn of a new day but the triumph of everything that made England great. The secret that had cancelled the royal ball had been revealed, the enemies of the crown had been defeated, and love had conquered all the forces that had conspired to keep two worthy hearts apart. As the curtain fell on this chapter of their story, Catherine and Alexander looked forward to a future that promised both personal happiness and continued service to the realm they loved above all things except each other. In the end, the greatest secret revealed by the cancelled royal ball was not the conspiracy that had threatened the crown, but the love that had grown between two hearts destined to face history's greatest challenges together. Their story would become legend, inspiring future generations with proof that true love, tested by fire and proven by courage, represents the greatest triumph that human hearts can achieve. The royal ball had ended, but their love story was just beginning.